Mr. President, thank you for convening this meeting upon the request of Algeria and with the support of China, Pakistan, Russia, and Somalia. I want to thank Mr. Turk, High Commissioner of Human Rights, for his presence among us and his briefing. Allow me also, Mr. President, at the outset to salute Dr. Yunus Al-Khatib, and through him, the heroes of the Palestine Red Crescent Society and the other humanitarians who are also the victims, rescuers needing to be rescued. While this council was convening to address protection of humanitarians and its resolution 2730 yesterday, we were mourning 15 humanitarians, including 8 members of the Palestine Red Crescent Society, killed and buried under the sand together with their ambulances. A UN vehicle and a fire truck shot in their head and in their chest multiple times, with several of them with their hands and legs tied. They were executed for performing their sacred mission, killed for trying to save lives. And I sent to you, Mr. President, a few minutes ago, a tape that was sent to me that was found in the body of one of the martyrs who videotaped this attack against the convoy while all of the cars with their lights on and the sirens on when they were ambushed by the Israeli army. And I leave it up to your discretion to share it with our colleagues to see with their own eyes exactly what happened. I was also told that there is another longer tape. They are trying to make it available to all of you to see the evidence of this crime through the eyes of one of the victims. Mr. President, this is a multi-layered siege, blocking humanitarian aid completely, but also making sure the civilian population is denied any assistance by killing humanitarians, destroying hospitals, and bombing shelters. Yesterday, the world has watched again as Palestinian civilians, including children, were burned alive after the bombing of an UNRWA clinic where they had found refuge. And today, an Israeli strike on a school in Gaza City, sheltering displaced families, killed, as far as we know now the number, went rising to at least 31 killed, and wounded at over 100, the majority of them women and children. Massacre after massacre after massacre. Israel's objectives is clear. Maximum despair to convince the Palestinian population that the only alternative to death is displacement out of Gaza. Mr. President, this is what Israel claims is pressure, quote unquote, killing tens of thousands of innocent Palestinians and denying them humanitarian aid indispensable to their very survival. Minister of War Katz confessed to this policy of collective punishment, and I quote, expanding the operation will increase the pressure on the Hamas murderers and also on the population in Gaza, end of quotation. He is not hiding that the target of this so-called pressure is the entire civilian population. What he dupes pressure being applied on the Palestinian population in Gaza is mass starvation, mass killing, mass destruction, mass displacement. He goes on to tell on the residents of Gaza to act now to remove Hamas and return all the hostages, saying This is the only way to end the war. So the civilians being killed and maimed and displaced are the ones who bear the responsibility to end the war. Palestinians want life. They want the genocide to end. They want the horrors to stop. They want to be treated as human beings. They want to mourn their dead and to try to find a way back to life. They are shouting it out to anybody willing to hear. Israeli bombs make no distinction. For them, all Palestinians are guilty and all of them deserve to die. This morning I listened to a speech by my brother Yunus al-Khatib in a meeting organized by the Committee on the Exercise of the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People. In that meeting he said many moving things, but one sentence captured my attention. He said that we, humanitarians, our job is to save lives. We do not make peace. It is your job. He was referring to delegates. And I thought that that is very telling. Him and his likes, they are in the business of saving lives, although they are losing their lives while they are doing that, but it is the business of all of you to make peace. He made that statement. So I hope that you allow me to repeat it on your behalf, because I thought it would be very appropriate also to be shared by the mighty Security Council. Mr. President, Israel's true objective is not the release of the hostages, but stealing Palestinian land. After having spread death and devastation across Gaza, Netanyahu has announced he is now dissecting Gaza, cutting through the territory and splitting it into pieces to annex it. Netanyahu spoke of seizing territory openly and unapologetically. Israel's Minister of War confessed to that too, saying that Israeli occupation forces will, and I quote, capture extensive territory that will be added to the state of Israel's security areas. End of quotation. Israeli leaders in parallel continue taunting and taking every action to advance the so-called voluntary migration, the code name for forcible transfer of Palestinians. The widespread condemnation of these Israeli actions have yet to translate into effective pressure to force it to stop. It is mind-boggling that such outrageous confessions to such terrifying crimes that have been taking place for such a long time with such an impact on millions of Palestinian civilians can still go unanswered. Mr. President, in the West Bank, the same ideology is at play. 40,000 Palestinians displaced within weeks, destructions and devastation of civilian infrastructure, and an unprecedented push for emptying land of its Palestinian population in the pursuit of permanent annexation. The E1 plan, which has been denounced internationally for 25 years, is now moving forward at an accelerated pace. It would further sever East Jerusalem from the rest of the West Bank, cut the West Bank in two, and amounts to annexation of vast areas in the heart of the West Bank, thus dealing a fatal blow to peace efforts. We often speak of displacement of communities, but it is important that those sitting around this table fully grasp this reality. I wish that they could hear directly from Basil Adra from Masafer Yatta, who is sitting behind me back there. The man, the main protagonist and co-director of the Oscar-winning documentary No Other Land, who is present here, as I said, today, about all those Palestinians across the occupied Palestinian territory who just want to be able to live in their ancestral land and want what they face every day. How armed settlers, protected and enabled and accompanied by soldiers, attack Palestinian families and communities and terrorize them to push them to leave. How these communities build homes to see them destroyed, build them again to face another destruction, or to see them burned by settlers. How families end up living in caves to stay in their land. How they face the Israeli occupation army, the Israeli settlers, and the Israeli courts that coalesce to push them out. Mr. President, I began with Yunus and ended with Basil. I began with Gaza and ended with the West Bank. But I cannot forget Walid Ahmed, the 17-year-old boy who died in Israeli prisons last week. His autopsy showed severe muscle loss, colitis, and scabies, indicating he was subject, like many other Palestinian prisoners, to starvation, medical neglect, and ill treatment. Everywhere, Palestinians treated as subhumans, killed and maimed, and starved and tortured. When will the world's outrage lead to resolute action? When, I wonder. Mr. President, Palestinians are standing tall in the face of this occupation-made storm to uproot them or kill them where they stand. But they are tired, exhausted, mourning, and suffering. They are heroes, but not superheroes. They are humans, and they are victims. They need support and protection now more than ever. Will you listen to their calls as my brother, Dr. Yunus Al-Khatib, end his statement by saying, are you listening to them? They want justice. Are you listening to them? In Masafir Yatta and in Gaza, in Nablus and in Jenin and in Tulkarim, and in Al-Khalil and in Jerusalem and beyond, Palestinians recorded live the crimes committed against them, thinking that if the world sees what Israel is doing, they will hold it accountable. The last evidence is the videotape that I sent to you, Mr. President. There are thousands, maybe tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of these videotapes by Palestinians in Gaza documenting crimes against them. And this morning, I was among a group of ambassadors. We listened to Mr. Lazzarini about the situation of UNRWA and other issues. He made an appeal to us. He said, we need international journalists to come and document what is happening in Gaza. Not only to take them with the Israeli army so that the Israeli army to show them what they want to show. Do we have the spine, all of us, the Security Council, all of the European countries, the United States of America, which has the fourth power in its system, which is journalism and the media? Do you have the courage to send journalists to all parts of the Gaza Strip to document what is really happening to the Palestinian people and the genocide that they are being exposed to? Send journalists. That's what Mr. Lazzarini was urging us. The more than 24 ambassadors, most of them are from the European Union. Why aren't we sending journalists to document what is real and what is fake news in the Gaza Strip? And we urge you to add your voices to the demand and to the call of Mr. Lazzarini. Send journalists send international journalists from the New York Times, from all media, from the BBC, to go and document what is really happening in the Gaza Strip. Now, the Palestinian people, I suppose, they wonder if impunity will ever end, if their lives will ever matter enough to trigger an appropriate reaction. This despair was reflected recently by a child shouting after the bombing of his house at a man filming him. What the hell are you filming? What for? Nobody is looking at us. Do you want the Palestinian people, the message to resonate deeper and deeper in their heads that the world is abandoning them, that the international community is abandoning them, that the Security Council is abandoning them? You see their images, their broken lives, their blood, their tears, their remains. These images move you. I know they do. But what matters to Palestinians is that they make you move. Not only to move you, but move. Resort to action. Do something. Stop this tragedy. Stop the killing of the Palestinians. Stop the firing. Demand a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire now, as you have decided in many resolutions, including Resolution 2735, and including the agreement, which was brokered by the United States of America, the current administration, few days before the inauguration of President Trump, and Egypt and Qatar. It was an agreement between Israel and Hamas, and those are the guarantors. Implement what you negotiated and you agreed to, and the Security Council reflected it in a Security Council resolution, the essence of it, 2735. You see their images, as I said, their broken lives, their blood, their tears, their remains. These images move you. I know they do, but what matters to Palestinians is that they make you move. They need to make governments across the world dare to do all the things they are still unwilling to do to bring this nightmare, this catastrophe to an end. Enough occupation and wars, enough suffering, enough bloodshed. We need ceasefire now. Support to the Arab reconstruction plan. Concrete and decisive measures adopted at the International Conference on the Peace Settlement of the Question of Palestine and the implementation of the two-state solution to be held in June and co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France. The Council must clearly support such an immediate ceasefire in line with its Resolution 2735. It must support reconstruction, freedom and peace in line with its mandate. Let life prevail. Let justice, freedom, and peace prevail. Let two states live side by side. Let all civilians be safe. Let our region unleash its true potential with shared peace, security, and prosperity. Yunus and Basil and so many others are doing their part. They need you to do yours. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie, Monsieur.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine. Your video has been made available to missions of members of the Security Council. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me start with my conclusion for our last debate. This war will not end until the 59 remaining innocent hostages are released and Hamas is driven from Gaza. Yet, every few days, this council convenes again to address the situation in Gaza, and every time the same pattern unfolds. Hamas commits an atrocity, Israel takes action to defend ourselves, and somehow the story that gets told in this room is upside down. Allow us to set the record straight. Take the incident on March 23 concerning the Red Crescent. Inside those vehicles, which are supposed to save lives, were active Hamas terrorists. 9 terrorists were eliminated, including Muhammad Amin Ibrahim Shubaki, a Hamas terrorist who directly took part in the October 7th massacre. I ask you, Mr. El-Khatib, what he was doing there? What he was doing in an ambulance, a Hamas terrorist who was in Israel on October 7th. Why he was connected to that? What is the connection between humanitarian work and terrorists of Hamas? Israel mourns the loss of innocent life wherever it takes place. We especially mourn the loss of any humanitarian workers. There must be, however, a reframing of the approach this Council and humanitarian agencies are taking. How did 9 Hamas terrorists find themselves traveling inside Red Crescent ambulances in the middle of the night? The presence of those terrorists puts everyone's lives at risk. If we really want to protect civilians and humanitarian workers, the vetting system of such organization must improve immediately. Otherwise, we will find more taxpayer money in the pockets of terrorists and more innocent lives in danger. As I have said, we are investigating all of those incidents, and we respect the work of UN personnel. However, this Council must acknowledge the infiltration of some agencies and their activities by bad actors. A prime example of the need for better vetting was discovered just 2 weeks ago. A UN worker was being treated in Israel, and something deeply disturbing was uncovered. This man had Nazi tattoos across both his arms. On one arm, as you can see, the man had the motto of the SS, a UN employee. On the other arm, the tattoo was the face of an SS soldier wearing a Nazi hat and a collar with Nazi symbols. It's hard to see, but that's what he had on both of his arms. Let me repeat. Underneath a shirt bearing the UN emblem were markings which glorified the Nazis. Who is approving these people? Who is conducting their interviews? The presence of such disgusting symbols on UN personnel should shock every member of this Council. So let us be clear. When terrorists operate in active combat zones while using humanitarian vehicles as taxis, we will do whatever it takes to protect our soldiers and our citizens in accordance with our international obligations. That is the price of defending human life in a war Hamas started and refuses to end. Of course, this is not a one-off. It is part of Hamas's system. Just days ago, as some of you mentioned earlier, our forces carried out a precise strike on Hamas terrorists in Jabalia. These terrorists were hiding inside a command and control complex built inside an UNRWA clinic. This terror hub was used by Hamas's Jabalia battalion to plan and coordinate attacks against Israeli civilians and IDF forces. So what you do when you have a command center of terrorists, you attack them. Our strike was deliberate, intelligence-based operation. Prior to the strike, many steps were taken to reduce the chance of harming civilians, including aerial observation and additional intelligence verification. But the truth is, this council simply cannot relate to the complexity of the situation Israel faces. We are facing a terrorist organization that carried out the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, raping, murdering, and burning entire families alive. And today they continue to hold our people in tunnels, subjecting them to torture, starvation, and psychological torment. They promise to commit these atrocities again and again and again. Not only that, but Hamas's entire strategy depends on the Council reacting exactly as it is. They steal aid trucks. They launch rockets from hospitals and UN facilities. They mobilize in ambulances. Today, ask yourselves, how they go from one place to another? You can testify to that. Sometimes they force themselves, sometimes they infiltrate the organization, but they don't move with taxis, no Uber, no military. They use ambulances and UN vehicles. They exploit humanitarian infrastructure as a shield because they know this council will rush to blame Israel for responding. Hamas has studied the United Nations and built its war plan based on the UN's moral confusion. Once again, we are seeing this tactic play out. The UN didn't wait for an investigation for any of the incidents discussed today. It did not wait for verified evidence. It didn't check the facts. It rushed to the microphones to condemn Israel before knowing anything at all, while ignoring the terrorist organization using its resources for evil. There is no other country on earth subjected to this kind of treatment. So many of the actions and statements here are political theater. They are not out of concern for the well-being of Gazans, because if that was truly the priority, we would be discussing the mass anti-Hamas protests taking place inside Gaza. In the past weeks, tens of thousands of Palestinians have taken to the streets, not to protest Israel, but to protest Hamas. In Jabalia, Rafah, Khan Yunis, Gaza City. Allow me to share with you the sounds filling the streets of Gaza over the past 48 hours. It will be in Arabic, so I welcome you to listen to the translator. In this audio, you can hear the incredible bravery of some Gazans, bravery which so many in this building are lacking. These brave people are chanting, Hamas itla bara, 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 bara. Hamas go out, 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 out. You can imagine how Hamas responded. Not with dialogue, not with reform, not by releasing our hostages and ending the war, but with public executions and torture. Uday al-Rubia, a 22-year-old from Gaza City, was kidnapped, beaten with iron rods, and dragged through the streets with a rope around his neck. What was his crime? Speaking out, organizing peaceful protests, demanding a future without Hamas. He was returned to his family moments before his death, broken and lifeless. Still, the mourners at Uday's funeral shouted in defiance against Hamas. Again, they shouted. Another brave young man, Hussam al-Majdalawi, was shot in the legs and abandoned in Nusrat Square. Mr. Mansour, these two young men, Uday and Hussam, have shown more bravery than you ever have. You speak here every time. For years, you still cannot bring yourself to even mention Hamas, let alone condemn them. How many times you have spoken in this council, but you cannot mention Hamas, you cannot tell them the truth. I ask you here and now, can you show some of the bravery of those young demonstrators? Can you condemn Hamas? Can you say Hamas, itla bara, 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 out, out, out? By your shameful silence, you stand with Hamas. By your shameful silence, you stand against the people of Gaza. By your shameful silence, you desecrate the UN Charter and its values. This Council and the entire UN has a choice to make. You can continue shielding Hamas under the cover of neutrality, or you can finally listen to the people of Gaza and support their cries for liberation from Hamas. You spoke about occupation of Gaza. I'm telling you here, and it's recorded, we have no intention to stay in Gaza. We left Gaza in 2005, completely. We didn't leave one community, not one soldier. We took out the cemeteries from Gaza. We left 20 years ago. We have no desire to go back. Distinguished colleagues, Israel will continue to defend its people. We will continue to take every measure possible to protect civilians and humanitarian workers, and we mourn every innocent life lost. However, we will never allow Hamas to rebuild under the false cover of human rights. Those days are long gone. We will not apologize for striking terrorist commanders. We will not hesitate to dismantle Hamas's terror machine, piece by piece, neighborhood by neighborhood, until the threat is gone. That is not our right. It is our obligation to our people, to our children, and to our future. Before I conclude, this war will not end on the UN's timeline. It will end when the 59 remaining hostages are released and Hamas is removed from power. There is no easy solution to a terrorist problem. There is no ceasefire agreement that can hold while innocent people remain in captivity. We are dealing with a vicious, sophisticated enemy with no red lines, no limits, no value for human life. We will do all that is necessary to defeat this dark force. We will act with determination until we bring back our hostages, every single one of them. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie, Monsieur.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Israel for that statement. I give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Libya.
Thank you, Mr. President. I make this statement on behalf of the Arab Group. I would like to thank you for positively responding to the call by Algeria to hold this important meeting. I also would like to thank Mr. Volker Turk and Dr. Yunus Al-Khatib for their briefings that highlight the magnitude of the tragedy and the deterioration that has exceeded all measures. Here, today, we speak as the crisis has reached its peak.
Je remercie Monsieur le
I thank the Permanent Representative of Libya. And I now give the floor to the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine, who has asked to make a further statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I do respect the ruling of the President in maintaining decorum in the meetings of the Security Council. Having said that, I don't think the speaker on this other side has the credibility to judge others about bravery and coward behavior, the one that his government and his forces, the one that their hands are dripping with the blood of tens of thousands of Palestinians, including 17,000 plus children, do not have the moral authority to judge anyone. And I respect our people immensely, including on the Gaza Strip. They are the ones who judge Palestinians' leaders, not those who are killing them and killing their children and women and destroying their houses over their heads. And it would be the appropriate thing for such a representative to review the conduct in his own house about their activities, which are now taking place in their own courts, about their corruptions and their relationship, in addition to the fact that the Prime Minister of that occupying authority is considered by the ICC as a war criminal, and he is being sought to appear in front of the International Court of Justice for the crimes committed against the Palestinian people. So those who live in houses of glasses should not throw stones at others. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie l'observateur.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine, and I give the floor to the permanent representative of Israel.
Mr. President, I will continue and remind you, Mr. Mansour, we are not your enemy. Your enemies are Hamas. The day that you will have the courage, the strength, the bravery to face the radicals of Hamas, you can speak about the future for the Palestinians. But as long as you will continue to blame Israel for everything, you will be here, or somebody else will be here, attacking Israel. There will be no future for your people, no future for the region. The enemy of the Palestinian people are the radicals who started the war against Israel on October 7th, and the radicals, you are even afraid to mention their name or to condemn them. That is your problem.
Je remercie Monsieur.
I thank the permanent representative of Israel. I give the floor to the permanent observer of Palestine for his final statement.
I apologize, Mr. President, for going through this episode. But let me just say to the representative of the occupying authority, when you stop killing our children and our people in this unprecedented number, like in the Gaza Strip, and imprisoning since 1967, as I said before, 1 million Palestinians, then there will be a chance for me to believe you. But when your conduct is like that, you cannot even convince a child among the Palestinian people that you mean well for the Palestinian people. End the killing, end the occupation, pave the way for ending this occupation to have two-state solution, living side by side, then there will be an opening for peace. But your conduct does not qualify you to be a partner. We don't have a partner for peace from your side. Clean your act through action, not through empty words. Then you might qualify to be a peace partner. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie Monsieur.
I thank the Permanent Observer of Palestine and I give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Israel for his final statement.
A bit very short, Mr. President. On October 6th, we had a ceasefire. On October 6th, it was peaceful in Israel, it was peaceful in Gaza. Thank you very much.
The 9,891st meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted.
Je donne la parole.
I now give the floor to the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mr. Volker Turk.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
it pains me to brief this Council once again on the catastrophic suffering of people in Gaza. The temporary relief of the ceasefire, which gave Palestinians a moment to breathe, has been shattered. Since 1 March, Israeli military operations have killed more than 1,200 Palestinians, including at least 320 children, according to the Ministry of Health in Gaza. And bombardments continue of residential buildings, tents, hospitals and schools, including places where Palestinians have been ordered to move. There was no let-up, even as Palestinian families celebrated Eid. I'm appalled by the recent killings of 15 medical personnel and humanitarian aid workers, which raise further concerns over the commission of war crimes by the Israeli military. There must be an independent, prompt, and thorough investigation into the killings, and those responsible for any violation of international law must be held to account. The Israeli military continues to strike camps for people who have been displaced numerous times, who have nowhere safe to go. The Israeli military also continues to force civilians to move. Half of Gaza is now under mandatory evacuation orders or has been declared a no-go zone. These orders fail to comply with the requirements of international humanitarian law. Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups continue to launch indiscriminate rockets from Gaza into Israel in breach of international humanitarian law. I'm also deeply concerned about the fate and well-being of Israeli hostages still held in Gaza.
Mr. President, it has now been a month since Israel imposed a complete blockade on vital humanitarian aid and supplies, including food, water, electricity, fuel, and medicines, thus harming the entire population of Gaza. The blockade and siege imposed on Gaza amount to collective punishment and may also amount to the use of starvation as a method of war. As of the 1st of April, the World Food Programme shut its 25 bakeries across Gaza, leaving many families without access to bread. Social tensions over food shortages are palpable, alongside reports of the excessive use of force by the local police. We are witnessing a return to the breakdown of social order that preceded the ceasefire. I am alarmed by the inflammatory rhetoric by senior Israeli officials around seizing, dividing, and controlling territory from the Gaza Strip and also transferring Palestinians outside Gaza. This raises grave concerns about the commission of international crimes and runs counter to the fundamental principle of international law against the acquisition of territory by force. In Resolution 2735, adopted in June, this Council rejected any attempt at demographic or territorial change in the Gaza Strip, including any actions that reduce the territory of Gaza. Mr. President.
The situation in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is also extremely alarming. Israeli operations in the North and West Bank have killed hundreds of people, destroyed entire refugee camps and makeshift medical sites, and displaced over 40,000 Palestinians. The announcement that residents must not return to their homes for a year raises serious concerns about long-term mass displacement. Since 7 October 2023, my office has verified that state and settler violence has killed 909 Palestinians across the West Bank, including 191 children and 5 people with disabilities, some of which may amount to extrajudicial and other unlawful killings. In the same period, 51 Israelis, including 15 women and 4 children, were killed in alleged Palestinian attacks or armed clashes, 33 in the West Bank and 18 in Israel. Illegal settlement expansion continues unabated as some Israeli ministers advocate for Israeli sovereignty in the occupied territory. Dozens of Palestinian herding and farming communities have been forced to leave their homes and their ancestral lands, while restrictions on movement have paralyzed the economy and are shredding the social fabric. While hundreds of Palestinian detainees were released during the ceasefire, hundreds more people have been arrested and detained. Within Israel, the severe crackdown on civic space, including against organizations defending the human rights of Palestinians, is also alarming. Monsieur le Président, nothing can justify the horrific attacks committed against Israeli communities on 7 October 2023, and nothing can justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, Israeli military operations since 7 October 2023 have killed more than 50,400 Palestinians in Gaza and injured more than 114,000 people. I urge the immediate restoration of the ceasefire and unimpeded humanitarian access throughout Gaza. I warn again that there is a high and increasing risk that atrocity crimes are being committed in the occupied Palestinian territory. Under the Geneva Conventions, states have an obligation to act when a serious violation of international humanitarian law has been committed. Under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, state parties have the responsibility to act to prevent such a crime when risk becomes apparent. I urge all those with influence to ensure the protection of civilians as a matter of absolute priority. It is essential that there is full accountability for all violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. All hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally. All those arbitrarily detained must also be released. Israel must refrain from any acts amounting to forcible transfer of Gaza's population. The last 18 months of violence have made abundantly clear that there is no military path out of this crisis. The only way forward is a political settlement based on 2 states living side by side in equal dignity and rights, in line with United Nations resolutions and international law. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Merci.
I thank the High Commissioner for his briefing. I now give the floor to Dr. Younes Al-Khatib, President of the Palestine Red Crescent Society.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, members of the Security Council. Attacks on aid workers must end. Perpetrators must be held to account. This was the message from Joyce Musaya, Assistant Secretary General of OCHA, during yesterday's meeting of the Security Council. We cannot but echo that important message and emphasize the critical need for the Security Council to do all it can to protect those selfless volunteers and staff whose main mission is to save lives during the darkest times of conflict and human suffering. Last Saturday, we witnessed one of the darkest moments yet in a conflict that has shocked our common humanity to the core. Many appalling records have been broken in this war in Gaza. The most number of aid workers killed in any single conflict. the number of children killed, the number of attacks on health workers and facilities, the extent of destruction of civilian infrastructures and homes, and the list goes on. Last Saturday, a PRCS mission coordinated and accompanied by the UN OCHA uncovered a mass grave where 15 first responders, including 8 members of the Palestine Red Crescent Society, paramedics, 6 members of the civil defense, and 1 United Nations officer were killed and buried. They were killed while on mission to save the lives, following reports of civilian casualties in the area of Tal Sultan in Rafah. We have documented the timelines of the mission, of the 3 ambulances, the communication between the first team and the dispatch, the time when we lost contact with the second and third team, and what the first team had witnessed when they went back to the scene and communicated it to the dispatch center. We have also documented the intense firing that the dispatch could hear while the VHF equipment were on. When the team member Asad al-Nasasra reported that they are being fired upon and that a number of colleagues were injured, that same team member is still missing, and we have no information on his fate. We call on the Israeli occupation forces to provide information on the fate and whereabouts of Assad. It's worth noting also that during the communication with the team, the dispatch could hear a conversation in Hebrew between the Israeli forces and the team, meaning some were alive, still alive, when they were under the control of the Israeli forces. Many council members have called for a thorough and independent investigation. We reiterate this call and believe this is the minimum the Security Council and the international community should demand on the way to hold those responsible to account. Mr. President, Excellencies, this is not the first incident where PRCS and UN aid workers and others have been killed while on mission to provide relief and life-saving assistance. We have lost 36 PRCS colleagues before this horrible incident. We also have been documenting and sharing with partners and member states all violations against the PRCS teams, facilities, and missions. Mr. President, it has been a whole month since Israel resumed fighting and enforced total closure on Gaza, including total blockade in all aid entering Gaza. 2 million people in Gaza are denied food, water, medicine, shelter, and electricity, in addition to the psychological trauma they have been enduring for the past 18 months. In an Israeli strategy of collective punishment to achieve war goals, this is a grave violation of international humanitarian law. During the 6 weeks of ceasefire implementation, humanitarian agencies, including PRCS, worked tirelessly to bring in relief, to bring back some level of basic services to the people in Gaza. including health and education services, only to see conditions worsening as violence returns to haunt people of Gaza even more brutally than before. Mr. President, Excellencies, many member states, organizations, and experts presented recommendations and action points throughout this conflict. Allow me to reiterate the following points. 1. We urge the Council to support the call for an independent and thorough investigation of this atrocious crime and hold those responsible to account. 2. We call on the Council members, individually and collectively, to take action to ensure respect for international humanitarian law. 3. Enforce existing mechanisms and tools at the disposal of the member states to ensure protection of humanitarian and aid workers and end impunity. 4. We call on the Security Council and on the whole international community to spare no effort to return to the ceasefire and to the end of violence immediately. 5. We call for the immediate resumption of aid delivery and the opening of borders crossings. The souls of Mustafa, Izzuddin, Saleh, Rifat, Muhammad Bahlul, Muhammad Al-Hili, Ashraf Ra'id, asking for justice. Can you hear them? Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank Mr. Al-Khatib for his briefing. I now give the floor to those Council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Algeria.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
At the outset, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to High Commissioner Volker Turk and to Dr. Yunus Al-Khatib for their sobering briefings. Their words are a stark reminder of the immense suffering endured by the Palestinian people and the barbarity they are subjected to. This is a collective punishment. This is a war crime. Algeria requested this meeting because we firmly believe that this Council must speak with clarity and strength. This Council must fully embrace its responsibilities. This Council must ensure the implementation of its own decision. Failure to do so will result in the loss of any remaining authority, any remaining legitimacy. And the world, our constituency, will no longer respect neither the Council nor its deliberation. Mr. President, the people of Gaza are facing unthinkable hardship. Israel, the occupying power, is responsible for Gaza becoming the deadliest conflict for aid workers, with more 400 killed. The deadliest conflict for journalists, with 209 journalists killed. The deadliest conflict for medical staff, with over 1,060 workers killed. And also, the deadliest conflict for children, with more than 17,000 children killed. These people, these innocent civilians, deserve justice. To save life, we must put an immediate end to the ongoing onslaught. And our resolution 2735 should be fully implemented without delay. Mr. President, since the resumption of the Israeli offensive on March 18, over 1,030 Palestinians have been killed daily. Over 103 Palestinians have been killed daily, and more than 223 injured daily. Yes, killing became the daily routine of Gazans, while the international community watches a genocide unfold live. And like all of us here, it remains passive. This morning, Israeli airstrikes targeted a school sheltering displaced people, killing dozens of civilians. Yesterday, the bombing of the UNRWA clinic in Jabalia by the Israeli forces resulted in the death of 22 people. The search of bodies after this massacre has been heartbreaking, with children identified only by their clothes. Red blouse for Abu Saada, brown blouse for Alian, at the youngest of these children. Was a baby 2 weeks old. As if the killing was not enough, for more than a month now, Israeli forces have literally blocked any humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. According to UNICEF, over 1 million people are starving to death inside the Gaza Strip. what is happening in Gaza is absolute horror, and such criminal behavior of the Israeli authorities must not go unchallenged. Mr. President, while we focus on the suffering in Gaza, we must not overlook the atrocities occurring in the West Bank. There also, the Israeli war machine has spared no part of the West Bank from its brutality. The figures of destruction, dispossession, annexation, arrestation, forced displacement, and finally, assassinations continue to rise daily. Israeli officials have publicly lauded their efforts, and they have made it clear that they will not allow the Palestinian Authority to effectively control the West Bank. In 2024, last year, the Israeli occupation forces seized 46 square kilometers of land, of Palestinian land in the West Bank. And settlement policy continued unabated, with settlements being described as the protector of the heart of Israel. Furthermore, Israeli officials have repeatedly assaulted Al-Aqsa Mosque, challenging the historical and legal status quo and the Hashemite custodianship of the holy sites. We strongly condemn all these actions. To conclude, Mr. President, history has taught us that no force can uproot a people from their land. And the Palestinian people will not be displaced. They will remain on their land. And with the support of all those who cherish freedom, peace, and justice, they will establish their independent state with Al-Quds Sharif as its capital. I thank you.
Je remercie Monsieur le représentant permanent.
I thank the permanent representative of Algeria for that statement.
Mr. President, if the walls of this chamber, the blue and gold tapestries with the symbols of faith, hope, and charity could speak, they would surely have many stories to share. Perhaps they would choose silence over words for many unfulfilled commitments made here. Perhaps they would cite resolutions of the Council never fully implemented. Perhaps quote statements of briefers shocking us with their accounts of the situation and suffering of civilians on the ground. Whatever those words would entail, they would point to one direction: erosion. What we see in Gaza is erosion of humanity. We are appalled by the Israeli attacks on humanitarian workers in Gaza. The UN, ICRC, Palestine Red Crescent Society, UNRWA, FAO, Médecins Sans Frontières, ICRC, Nasser Hospital, humanitarian workers in these institutions have been under fire since the hostilities resumed. We are shocked by the latest attacks on the humanitarian convoy, killing 15 medical and humanitarian workers. Dr. Al-Khatib, we offer our condolences to you and to the families and friends of those who have been killed. We cannot choose to believe that these were simply mistakes. Slovenia condemns all attacks on all humanitarian, medical, and UN personnel. They must be protected and supported in their mission at all times. We call on Israel to re-establish humanitarian notification and deconfliction mechanism. We call for an end to these attacks. Intentionally directing attacks against personnel involved in a humanitarian assistance mission is a war crime and must be prosecuted accordingly. What we see is erosion of protection of civilians. We condemn the killings of civilians, particularly women and children, since the collapse of the ceasefire. We hear from humanitarian organizations that food and fuel are running out. We call on Israel to immediately lift the siege on Gaza and ensure safe and unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance at scale. We underline that starvation as a method of war is a war crime. We are appalled by the issuance of new evacuation orders in Gaza. We caution against the implementation of the so-called humanitarian bubbles and the militarization of aid in Gaza. We once again appeal to Israel to reverse the implementation of legislation against UNRWA. Colleagues, what we see is erosion of respect for international law. International law, particularly international humanitarian law and human rights law, must be respected by all. We call for impartial and thorough investigations of all incidents involving humanitarian workers. We ask the results of these investigations to be shared with the Council. Violations taking place on and after 7 October must be prosecuted. Only accountability will ensure non-repetition. Ongoing expansion of the Gaza war and the operations in the West Bank must stop. We are appalled by the situation in West Bank marked by settler violence, destruction, demolition, movement restrictions, displacement, and repeating violations of the status quo of the holy sites. Occupation must end as ordered by the ICJ. We reject any seizures of Palestinian land and forced displacement of Palestinians. We emphasize that Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem form an indivisible whole of the Palestinian state where governance must be under the Palestinian Authority. What we see in Israel and Palestine is erosion of peace and security. So let us repeat, there is no military solution to any conflict, and neither for conflicts in the Middle East. More war does not bring more peace. Not to Israel, not to Palestine, not to the region, nor the globe. With each passing day, the region is less secure and future is more unstable. We once again call for an end of Israeli occupations in Gaza and the West Bank and for an end of attacks on Israel. We call on Israel and Hamas to return to the agreement made in line with the Resolution 2735 with the support of Egypt, Qatar, and the United States. Ceasefire must be restored. Hostages must be released. Aid must flow and dialogue must prevail. The only path to lasting peace can be the one of diplomacy. The only solution for ensuring lasting peace is the two-state solution endorsed by this Council. Mr. President, I recall the briefing of the Palestine Red Crescent Society in November 2023. Back then, you, Dr. Al-Khatib, you asked us to listen to the cries of children soaked in blood, asking why this is happening, what they have done, and why the world is so indifferent to their lives. This feeling of abandonment by the international community, unfortunately, continues to this day. I can assure you that Slovenia is not indifferent, yet almost a year and a half later, we are unable to answer their question. So, colleagues, erosion of this magnitude can lead to one thing only, and this is a chaos. Despite challenges we face as the Council throughout this war, much has been done with clear united demands from this Council, including through 4 resolutions. Let us make sure that our demands are implemented to prevent further erosion of the international system that we have built. Thank you.
Je remercie, Monsieur.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Slovenia. I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of the United Kingdom.
I'd like to start by thanking High Commissioner Volker Turk and Dr. Yunus Al-Khatib for your sobering briefings. Our thoughts and deepest condolences are with the families of the Red Crescent medics and other humanitarians who were killed while bravely working to save lives in Gaza. Their deaths are an outrage, and we expect this incident to be investigated fully, transparently, and for those responsible to be held to account. Gaza remains the most dangerous place for humanitarians in the world. If Israel does not respect deconfliction notifications from aid workers to allow them to operate without coming under attack, there will be more appalling deaths like these ones. Aid workers should not have to risk their lives to help those in need. So we urge Israel to cooperate with the UN fact-finding mission into the hit on a UN compound on the 19th of March, to conduct thorough investigations into all incidents involving aid workers and medical personnel, and ensure accountability for those responsible. President, I have 3 points to make. First, the UK reiterates its call for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, including Avinatan Orr, Yossi Sharabi and Shay Levinson, who have links to the UK. And we are clear, Hamas must be held accountable for their despicable actions. But the UK strongly opposes Israel's decision to resume and expand its military operations in Gaza. Since operations restarted, over 1,000 Palestinians have lost their lives, including at least 322 children. And civilians are being compressed into ever smaller areas. Further fighting and bloodshed is in nobody's interest and takes us further away from a deal to get the hostages home. Second, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is horrific, and there is reportedly less than a week of food left for distribution in Gaza. We urge Israel to reinstate the flow of humanitarian aid immediately. Blocking supplies and electricity from entering Gaza risks violating international humanitarian law. The UK is deeply concerned that the UN and humanitarian organisations have been forced to reduce operations in Gaza because it is so unsafe. Without their life-saving work, even more Palestinians will suffer. Third, the UK condemns remarks by Defence Minister Katz on the annexation of land in Gaza. There must be no forced displacement of Palestinians or reduction in the territory of Gaza. This would only further drive instability and undermine security for Israelis and Palestinians alike. And we condemn recent Israeli decisions to accelerate the establishment of settlements and outposts in the West Bank. President, in conclusion, the lesson we have learnt time and again in this Council is that diplomacy, not violence, is the only way to bring lasting peace. We urge the parties to return to a ceasefire to end appalling loss of life, bring the hostages home, and make credible efforts towards a two-state solution. I thank you.
Remercie.
I thank the Permanent Representative of the United Kingdom for that statement. I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of China.
Thank you, President. I thank Algeria for requesting today's meeting. And I thank High Commissioner Turk and Mr. Al-Khatib for their briefings. Shortly after the conclusion of Ramadan, the most sacred month for Muslims around the world, Gaza is once again shrouded in death and killing. Since March the 17th, when Israel launched massive assaults, over 1,000 Palestinians have been killed, including more than 300 children. The humanitarian situation on the ground has sharply deteriorated, with 2 million people deprived of essential supplies, and many facing the prospects of yet another displacement. In the past 2 days alone, Israel's military operations have forced over 100,000 people to flee Rafah. Gaza is plunging back into war. The priority now for the international community, especially the Security Council, is to step on the brakes before greater civilian casualties and humanitarian disasters occur. I will make 3 points. First, it is imperative to promote a lasting ceasefire in Gaza with a maximum sense of urgency. Renewing hostilities will only lead to more killing and hatred, and in no way represents the right approach to free the hostages. Achieving a lasting ceasefire is the best way to save lives and bring hostages home. Recently, Israel announced its plans to expand ground offensive and occupy Gaza territory. We express serious concern about this development and urge Israel to immediately halt its military operations in Gaza. The guarantor countries of the agreement should uphold an impartial and responsible attitude, promote the continuous implementation of the agreement in all 3 phases, and achieve a lasting ceasefire in Gaza. Second, concrete actions must be taken to restore humanitarian access to Gaza. Since March the 2nd, when Israel cut off the flow of supplies into Gaza, no aid has arrived in Gaza for an entire month. Over 2 million Palestinians who are already languishing in Gaza now face another dire humanitarian crisis. China firmly opposes the use of humanitarian aid as a weapon and bargaining chip. Lifting the blockade on Gaza and fully restoring humanitarian access is an obligation under international humanitarian law that Israel must fulfill as the occupying power. Third, attacks on humanitarian workers must be stopped. UN personnel and humanitarian workers must not be targeted. Yet, this fundamental principle of international humanitarian law has been repeatedly violated in Gaza. Since the eruption of the current conflict, 408 aid workers have been killed in Gaza, making it the most dangerous place for humanitarians. On March the 23rd, 15 humanitarian workers were killed by the Israeli military, and their bodies were not found until March the 30th in a mass grave in Gaza. Also found near the grave were damaged vehicles with clear humanitarian markings. This is indeed shocking. We express our deepest condolences to the victims. We strongly condemn all attacks on UN personnel and humanitarian workers. We call for a thorough investigation into this incident to ensure accountability. While the conflict is raging in Gaza, the situation in the West Bank is extremely tense. Israel continues to escalate its military operations in the West Bank, forcibly expelling refugees from multiple camps, causing heavy civilian casualties and displacing over 40,000 people. Israel continues to expand settlements, condone settler violence, and squeeze the living space of the Palestinian people, eroding the basis of the two-state solution. Settlement activities are in breach of international law and Security Council resolutions and should cease immediately. President, implementing the two-state solution is the only viable way to resolve the question of Palestine. Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, are all integral parts of the State of Palestine. China opposes any forced relocation of Gazans and any attempts to annex the territories of Gaza or the West Bank. We support the Gaza Recovery and Reconstruction Plan initiated by Egypt and other Arab countries, and support the principle of Palestinians governing Palestine in the reconstruction process. The international community should redouble its efforts to advance the political process of the two-state solution and provide the necessary guarantees. China will continue to work tirelessly with the international community to end the conflict in Gaza, alleviate the humanitarian plight, implement the two-state solution, and ultimately achieve a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution to the question of Palestine. Thank you, President.
Je remercie.
I thank the Permanent Representative of China for that statement. I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank France for convening this emergency briefing at the request of Algeria, supported by Pakistan, China, the Russian Federation, and Somalia. We also thank Mr. Volker Turk, UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and Dr. Yunus Al-Khatib, President of the Palestine Red Crescent Society, for their sobering and very moving briefings. And I think they provide just a little glimpse of the dire situation faced by the Palestinians and all civilians on ground in the region. The Security Council has convened repeatedly to address the humanitarian catastrophe in the occupied Palestinian territories, particularly in Gaza. Yet, despite these discussions, the Council has failed to provide relief to the innocent Palestinians suffering from indiscriminate bombings, starvation, displacement, and collective punishment, all of which are blatant violations of international law and international humanitarian law. This grave humanitarian crisis reflects the Council's inaction, setting a dangerous precedent. The Palestinian people are left questioning whether this body will take meaningful steps or merely lament their suffering. Our failure not only undermines this institution, but also erodes the international order built on the UN Charter. The Council must assert its relevance by ensuring the implementation of its own decisions before it is rendered inconsequential. Gaza has descended into an abyss of suffering, an unprecedented man-made catastrophe where hospitals, schools, and shelters are attacked indiscriminately. Children and women perish under the rubble. Humanitarian workers, including the UN personnel, are targeted deliberately to cut off the lifeline of the affected populations. And journalists are targeted and silenced to prevent reporting of the atrocities being committed by the Israeli occupation forces. Nothing is spared, not even the historic cultural sites. It is total annihilation, a situation where fundamental principles of humanitarian law are being disregarded with impunity. Israel's blatant violation of the ceasefire agreement brokered by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States has unleashed a reckless wave of killings and devastation. Instead of heeding calls from this Council, the General Assembly, and the ICJ, Israel has expanded its bombardments and ground operations. Since breaking the ceasefire last month, over 1,100 Palestinians have been killed, adding to the more than 50,000 martyred between October 23 and January 25, including 17,000 children. This is not just warfare, it is the systematic destruction of a people. For 1 month, Israel has sealed all border crossings, blocking humanitarian aid. No food or medical supplies have entered Gaza. UNICEF warns that 1 million children are without basic necessities, while WFP warns of imminent famine. Starvation as a weapon of war is a war crime. The deliberate targeting of aid convoys and medical personnel further dismantles international humanitarian law. More than 400 humanitarian workers, including 284 UNRWA personnel, have been killed, the highest toll in modern history. Pakistan strongly condemns the attack on a medical and emergency convoy on 23rd March, which killed 15 humanitarian workers in Gaza. When UN staff and humanitarian workers are gunned down with impunity, we must ask, what remains of the global order we built from the ashes of the World War II? While Gaza burns, the West Bank witnesses its own Nakba. Over 40,000 Palestinians have been driven from their homes, the largest displacement since 1967. 99 lives have been lost since January amid intensifying military raids and settler violence. Israel's intent to permanently colonize and annex the occupied West Bank is alarming and unacceptable. Equally concerning are Israel's plans to seize territory in Gaza, including the establishment of a so-called security corridor. This would constitute a dangerous escalation and a violation of international law. We also condemn the Israeli deliberate violation of Al-Aqsa Mosque's sanctity, an act of provocation and a clear breach of religious freedoms protections under international law. Mr. President, the international community, particularly this Council, must move beyond rhetorical condemnations to concrete action. Pakistan reiterates its calls for, first, an immediate cessation of hostilities, full implementation of the January ceasefire agreement by the parties in all its 3 stages, and that would be in accordance with this Council's Resolution 2735, and an extension of the ceasefire to the West Bank. Second, the immediate lifting of the illegal Israeli blockade to allow full, unconditional, and unimpeded humanitarian access. Starvation must not be allowed to be weaponized. Third, guarantees for the protection of UN staff and aid workers in line with international humanitarian law. In this regard, we would like to reiterate our proposal and call for setting up a global implementation dashboard for Resolution 2730 under the UN auspices. This dashboard would provide real-time public tracking of recording violations, investigations, and their outcomes. There must be accountability for these crimes. There must be an end to impunity. Fourth, prevention of any form of forced displacement of Palestinians from their land or annexation of Palestinian territory. Fifth, we all agree that the two-state solution remains the only viable path to sustainable peace. There is a clear need to revive a credible and irreversible political process towards that end. The June conference, to be co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia, will be an important milestone in this regard. Pakistan reaffirms its unwavering support for an independent, sovereign, and contiguous Palestinian state based on the pre-1967 borders, with Al-Quds al-Sharif as its capital. Mr. President, Israel's violations and disregard for international law and the resolutions of this Council also extend beyond Gaza and Palestine to Lebanon and Syria, where we see repeated strikes in violation of the ceasefire, in violation of the Council's resolutions and international law. This is a familiar pattern that we have seen so often over a period of time, challenging this Council and the international community. I think this brings us back to the fundamental fact, a fact that a just and lasting peace in this region is possible only by addressing the root cause, and that is the Israeli occupation of the Arab territories, and this occupation must end. Mr. President, what is happening before our eyes is a travesty. It is simply unacceptable. The Council must act. We cannot be part of a body that remains a mere spectator and does nothing. We refuse to be part of this moral bankruptcy and what our Slovenian colleague referred to as erosion of humanity. We are at a crossroads. We clearly see from one side the occupying power, deliberate attempts to sabotage the hard-won ceasefire, to undermine the Gaza reconstruction plan endorsed by the Arab and the OIC summit, and welcomed by the international community, and an attempt to sabotage the efforts to revive the peace process for the realization of a two-state solution. Yet, the rest of the international community is clearly on the other side. It is clearly in support of peace, in support of ceasefire, in support of humanitarian assistance, and stands fully behind. I think the international community, represented by all regions around the world, they stand fully behind the imperative of a peace process and the June conference. We believe that in doing so, the wider international community stands for international law, justice, and peace. I think as members of this Council, it is our collective responsibility to translate the will of the international community into concrete actions, to finally move towards a just and durable peace in the region, and that is in the interest of all sides.
Mr. President, and thank you to Commissioner Turk and President Al-Khatib for your briefings. Hamas is solely responsible for the resumption of hostilities since March 18th, refusing time and again to accept proposals to extend the ceasefire. For too long, Hamas has abused civilian infrastructure and facilities, cynically using it to physically shield its personnel and weaponry. Hamas's reckless and contemptuous behavior has put civilians and humanitarian personnel at risk, purposefully placing them in the crossfire. The use of civilians and civilian objects to shield or impede military operations is a violation of international humanitarian law, which all parties to armed conflict must comply with. Mr. President, I join others in expressing sincere condolences for the humanitarian workers who lost their lives in this conflict. Every death, including those of UN and humanitarian workers that many have discussed today, would have been avoided had Hamas accepted the bridge proposal on the table last month. Moreover, the IDF has reported, with respect to the incident on March 23rd, that uncoordinated vehicles were identified advancing toward IDF troops without headlights or emergency signals. Additionally, the IDF has indicated that earlier that day, vehicles passed safely on the route after they were coordinated with the IDF. The IDF and COGAT established a deconfliction mechanism, and it is important that all actors use this mechanism to help ensure the safety of civilians and humanitarian workers. Mr. President, Hamas's reckless decisions have caused enough bloodshed. They have no right to represent Palestinians anywhere and must leave Gaza. All of this violence could stop today if Hamas returned the hostages and the bodies it still holds and laid down its weapons. There is one entity that could stop violence for everyone in a moment, and that is Hamas. The Council should speak with one voice to apply pressure on Hamas to, for the first time, act in the interests of the Palestinian people they purport to represent, and not in the interests of their own selfish ends. We must recognize the bravery of Palestinian civilians in Gaza protesting against Hamas's despotic rule, calling for Hamas to release the remaining hostages, step down, and leave Gaza forever. This flood of life movement reflects the civilian population's rejection of Hamas. This Council's efforts should focus on applying pressure to dislodge Hamas, who responded to these organic challenges to its rule the only way it knows how, by murdering 22-year-old Palestinian Odeh Nasser al-Arbai and disposing of his body at his family's home. We must heed Palestinian voices that reflect Hamas's failures and deadly rule over Palestinians in Gaza. And our partners in the region must amplify these voices too and remove Hamas from Gaza once and for all. As it relates to the West Bank, the United States supports the efforts of the Israel Defense Forces to root out violent extremists in Jenin and Tulkarem. We call on the Palestinian Authority to finally carry through on its announcement to end the practice of offering cash payments to the families of those who have carried out terrorist attacks, which for far too long incentivized violence against Israeli civilians and set back the prospects of peace. We will be closely monitoring implementation of these recent commitments. Colleagues, it has been nearly 18 months since Hamas started this horrific conflict, one that has upended so many lives and caused so much immense suffering. Hamas must release the remaining 59 hostages, including 5 Americans, New Jersey resident Idan Alexander, and the bodies of Itai Shen, Gad Haggai, Judy Weinstein-Haggai, and Omer Nutra, who were brutally murdered on October 7, 2023. President Trump has been clear that Hamas must release all remaining hostages immediately. As we have repeatedly said, the future of the Middle East must also look different. Fresh thinking is needed for a better tomorrow for Israelis, Palestinians, and all the region's people. We look forward to continued discussions with our Arab partners on the future of Gaza without Hamas. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. We note the statement of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk. We thank the President of the Palestine Red Crescent Society, Younis Al-Khatib, for his thorough briefing on the situation in the Palestinian-Israeli conflict zone. And we are also grateful to Mr. Al-Khatib for his additional briefings and meetings with delegations during his time in New York. This allowed us to get the latest information about the situation on the occupied Palestinian territory. Right away, we supported the request of Algeria for today's council meeting, since the situation on the occupied Palestinian territory in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank remains unacceptably critical. After the breakdown in the agreement between Hamas and Israel, for more than a month now, Palestinian civilians have been in the conditions of a full ground, air, and maritime blockade. West Jerusalem is not only blocking the delivery of humanitarian goods, but has also restricted the work of the humanitarian organizations of the UN, which led to existential problems for 2 million people. A simple example is that all of the bakeries in the enclave have closed due to a shortage of flour and fuel. How the lack of bread in Gaza is going to help Israel release the hostages who also aren't getting that flour is a mystery for us. Alongside the humanitarian catastrophe, we are seeing the ongoing destruction of civilian infrastructure and the deaths of humanitarian workers. Since October 2023, in Gaza, at least 408 staff of humanitarian organizations have died. That makes this conflict the most lethal by this measure since records began. Hope for the situation changing for the better is almost non-existent because Israel's strikes on the Gaza Strip are carrying out on an almost constant basis. On the 2nd of April at 10 a.m., the Israeli Air Force launched a strike on the UNRWA Medical Center in Jabalia. Although that object was no longer being used for medical purposes, it was serving as a shelter for more than 700 people. According to reports, as a result of this latest inhumane Israeli attack, dozens of civilians died, including a child that was barely 2 weeks old. Despite the warnings of UNRWA staff members about the risks of staying in the building after the attack, many of the displaced families stayed there because they simply had nowhere else to go. Today alone, as a result of indiscriminate Israeli airstrikes across the Gaza Strip, at least 100 people have been killed. Bombs have been dropped on residential buildings, schools that were being used as shelters and tent cities. Witnesses report that in Gaza City, where 58 people died, local residents, in the absence of any rescue equipment, had to clear the rubble with their bare hands in the hope of, by some miracle, finding survivors. We express our sincere condolences to all of those that have been killed, and we wish a swift recovery to those affected. We underscore that it is also the so-called security zones that are being hit, those zones that were established by the Israelis themselves. Such blatant disregard for the norms of international humanitarian law deserves to be roundly condemned. In total, since the beginning of the war, more than 300 UN objects have been attacked, and some of them repeatedly so. Mr. President, we were shocked by the news of the discovery on the 31st of March of a mass grave in which 15 humanitarian workers were buried, including UN staff and 8 medics from the Palestine Red Crescent Society. Representatives of OCHA have already placed responsibility for this crime on Israel. According to UN data, after the first group of medics and humanitarian workers went missing on the 23rd of March, the Israelis methodically took out all of those that tried to come to the aid of their comrades. And yet, the ambulances were clearly marked, as were the doctors' uniforms. These sorts of actions can have no justification. In the context of the discussion of this specific subject, we call upon all parties to make every effort to find the one member of the Palestine Red Crescent team that is still listed as missing, Asad al-Nasasra. His body was not found among the dead. The protection of humanitarian personnel, which the Council discussed in detail in this chamber literally yesterday, is an unconditional imperative and obligation in accordance with the norms of international humanitarian law. Mr. President, having, following the end of the first phase of the agreement with Hamas, made further demands for the further implementation of that agreement, Israel resumed its military operation and is gradually expanding its control over Gaza. On the 1st of April, Prime Minister Netanyahu announced the creation of a second Philadelphia corridor, the Morag axis that would cut Rafah off from Khan Yunis. We should also, in the same vein, consider the statements of the Minister of Defense of Israel, Israel Katz, about the expansion of military operations in the enclave and the creation of additional security zones. Thus, the territory upon which Gazans have to huddle is steadily shrinking. And this forces them to make a choice to remain in Gaza without water, electricity, or sufficient sustenance, in the hope that the Israeli operation will at some point end and that they will not become the victims of another airstrike, or to leave the Gaza Strip. Of course, in these circumstances, there can be no discussion of evacuation or voluntary emigration. We confirm our position of principle that it is unacceptable for there to be territorial and demographic changes in Gaza, which was and remains an integral part of the Palestinian state. In the context of the catastrophic humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, particularly under the full blockade introduced since the 2nd of March, we are increasingly concerned by signals from various sources about Israel's plans in future to establish full control over the supply and distribution of assistance to the enclave. We hope that West Jerusalem will not take these steps, which would contradict the reports to the Security Council by the UN Senior Coordinator for the Provision of Humanitarian Assistance and Reconstruction of the Gaza Strip, Sigrid Kaag, about the functioning of the one-stop shop mechanism agreed with Israel, which we all supported. We also confirm our firm support for UNRWA, which plays an irreplaceable role in providing assistance to the Palestinians. The agency's experience, its extensive system of humanitarian assistance, and the infrastructure built up over decades is vital in the current critical situation in the enclave. We call upon the Israeli authorities to revise the discriminatory and prohibitive decisions relating to UNRWA and to return to compliance with its international legal obligations. Mr. President, a worrying situation is also forming on the West Bank. The Israeli Operation Iron Wall is expanding. In Jenin alone, 34 people have been killed and dozens were wounded. 21,000 people have become internally displaced persons, and at least 600 homes have been destroyed. Since the 7th of October 2023, on the West Bank, around 16,000 people have been detained. The provocations continue by settlers. 50 extremist settlers organized a pogrom in the Palestinian village of Douma. Unfortunately, the Israeli authorities are not only not punishing the offenders, but they are often indulging them. The Israeli settlement expansion on the West Bank is taking place with unprecedented speed. 47% of the West Bank has already essentially been taken away from Palestinians. In the first 3 months of this year, the construction of 10,503 housing units has been approved, which is higher than the similar figure for the whole of 2024. By some assessments, at this rate, in 2 years' time, any prospects for the two-state solution will be entirely wiped out. Even today, the West Bank is essentially divided into two parts because of Israel's infrastructure projects in Jerusalem, and hundreds of checkpoints across the West Bank are seriously restricting the daily activities of Palestinians. Such actions are entirely in line with Israel's practice over decades in the West Bank of taking steps that rule out the continued contiguity of the OPT. Key parts of this tactic are settlement blocks and related infrastructure, the dividing wall, the system of roadblocks and checkpoints, and the destruction of Palestinian buildings, the confiscation of land, and organizing regular security raids, which are now spilling over into fully fledged operations in Jenin, Tulkarm, and other cities. We are also deeply concerned by the broader regional context. The resumption of arbitrary Israeli strikes on Beirut and continuing airstrikes on Syria, US strikes on Yemen, and also the preparations for public opinion for a full-scale operation against Iran. In sum, today, the entire Middle East region is closer to a large-scale conflict, the consequences of which would be catastrophic. We call upon all to step back from this dangerous brink. Mr. President, the logic of war fully rules out any possibility of returning home the Israeli hostages. In this paradigm, there's space for further senseless deaths and destructions, mass graves of doctors, thousands of children killed. But that same logic rules out prospects for the reconstruction of Gaza that was realistically outlined in the plan proposed by the Arab states. In the inhumane conditions that the residents of the enclave have to survive in and that are being created in the West Bank, a breeding ground is being created for radicalization and breeding hatred for Israel and its people. What is the point for West Jerusalem of getting rid of Hamas if its place is occupied by other people with another name for whom the struggle with Israel will be the only way for them to restore justice? In fact, decades without a just solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is precisely what led to the present tragic situation. We are convinced of the need for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, the release of all forcibly detained persons, and ensuring safe and unhindered humanitarian access. At the same time, it is important that the agreements reached are sustainable. As practice shows, without guarantees and oversight by the international community, any truces could collapse overnight. In that regard, the UN Security Council must play a key role in the negotiating process and in ensuring compliance with its outcomes by all parties. We call upon international mediators to make this a priority in their efforts to return to the peace process. In this context, we would like to once again confirm our unchanging commitment to the creation of an independent Palestinian state in the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. It must coexist in peace and security with Israel in accordance with the approved international legal decisions. Colleagues, in these circumstances, there could be dangerous consequences for the preserving of a vacuum in key posts in the region, the special coordinator for the peace process and the senior coordinator for assistance to the Palestinians. We call upon the UN Secretary General as quickly as possible to present the UN Security Council with candidates to that effect. In conclusion, we would like to underscore that as regards possible practical steps by the Council and the adoption of products related to the worsening crisis in Gaza, we are guided by the position of the Arab group. We also stand ready to work with everyone that wants to achieve a just, long-term and sustainable peace in the Middle East on the basis of the well-known Security Council decisions in the context of the Palestinian-Israeli peace process. Thank you for your attention.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the permanent representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank you for convening this meeting at the request of Algeria, with support from the Russian Federation, China, Pakistan, and Somalia on the concerning situation in the occupied Palestinian territory. I thank High Commissioner Volker Turk for his comprehensive and sobering briefing. I commend Dr. Younis Al-Khatib, President of the Palestinian Red Crescent Society, for the selfless humanitarian work in the most difficult and dangerous circumstances, and I thank him for the compelling contribution. Sierra Leone is gravely alarmed by the rapidly deteriorating situation in the OPT. The humanitarian catastrophe unfolding in Gaza and the surge in violence across the West Bank demand urgent and sustained attention by the Security Council. Every additional day of conflict means more lives lost, more families shattered. The killing must stop. We must uphold our collective responsibility to protect human life and dignity under international law. For weeks, Gaza has endured a total blockade, coupled with relentless bombardment. For over a month, no food, water, fuel, or electricity entered Gaza, creating a man-made crisis of epic proportions. Around 90% of Gaza's population is now displaced, many multiple times. The entire population depends on humanitarian assistance for survival. Despite soaring needs, life-saving relief has been obstructed. Hospitals have shut down for lack of fuel and security, while thousands of wounded civilians go untreated. Water, food, and medicine are critically scarce. The civilian population is exhausted, starving, and desperate. Humanitarian workers have not been spared. Since October 2023, at least 369 aid workers, including 263 UNRWA staff, have been killed. They are among the highest casualty figures ever recorded for humanitarian personnel in any conflict. Most were Palestinians, serving their own communities. We express our deepest condolences to the family of the aid workers killed. Sierra Leone strongly deplores these killings and all attacks on humanitarian personnel. These actions are not just violations of international law, they are violations of our shared humanity. The legal obligations are clear. Under the Fourth Geneva Convention and customary international law, the State of Israel, as the occupying power, is responsible for the safety and welfare of the civilian population in the OPT. This includes ensuring access to food, water, medicine, and other essentials. These are not aspirational principles. They are binding rules that save lives. We therefore draw the attention to the binding provisional measures ordered by the International Court of Justice in the application of the Genocide Convention, South Africa versus Israel case. The ICJ has ordered the State of Israel to ensure the provision of basic humanitarian necessities to Gaza. The provisional measures are binding under international law. To date, these measures have not been respected. The defiance and seeming impunity undermine the credibility of the international legal system and even this Council. Mr. President, even as Gaza is being plummeted by bombs, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is witnessing an alarming escalation. Since 7 October 2023, settler violence against Palestinians has more than doubled. Attacks include assault, arson, and destruction of homes and livelihood, and often reportedly carried out in the presence or with the acquiescence of Israeli security forces. We are deeply concerned by reports of entire Palestinian villages being emptied following settler threats, violence, and forced displacement. These acts are occurring in a climate of impunity, defying the State of Israel's obligation as the occupying power to protect civilians under international humanitarian law. We recall the advisory opinion of the ICJ regarding the legal consequences arising from the policies and practices of Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and the clear view of the World's Court that, and I quote, "The State of Israel is under an obligation to bring to an end its unlawful presence in the occupied Palestinian territory as rapidly as possible." End of quote. The government of the State of Israel is, however, acting to the contrary. Sierra Leone is therefore gravely alarmed by these grave breaches of international law, including excessive force, punitive military raids, and settler violence. These abuses are part of a broader crisis and must be addressed accordingly and immediately. Without accountability, tensions will continue to rise. Impunity entrenches, and prospects for peace will further diminish. Respect for international law is not optional. We reiterate that all parties must comply. That includes Palestinian armed groups, notably Hamas. We continue to strongly condemn the deliberate targeting of Israeli civilians, the killing of non-combatants, and the taking of hostages. These actions violate international law and must cease. All hostages must be released immediately and unconditionally. The principle of humanity applies to all. There can be no double standards. Israeli and Palestinian lives are equally valuable, and no civilian anywhere should live in fear of violence, starvation, or displacement. Mr. President, the Security Council cannot remain a passive observer. We have heard the Secretary General's call for humanitarian ceasefire. We have seen the ICJ issue binding orders. We have witnessed immense courage for humanitarian workers facing fire to deliver aid. The Council must continue to act, even if within the framework of Resolution 2735. Sierra Leone therefore calls for the following urgent steps. First, an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. The Council must call for all hostilities to stop, and now. The continuation of military operations in densely populated areas only guarantees further death and destruction. There is no military solution. A political process must begin with silencing the guns. Second, the Council to demand for unimpeded humanitarian access and aid. Gaza must be fully and consistently accessible to humanitarians and for humanitarian aid. Safe corridors must be established for the delivery of food, fuel, medicine, and the treatment or evacuation of the sick and wounded. All obstacles to aid, including blockades and administrative delays, must be removed immediately. In this regard, we call for the full implementation of all Security Council resolutions 2712, 2720, and 2728. Third, on the release of hostages and detainees. All hostages held by armed groups must be freed without delay. No cause justifies the captivity of civilians. At the same time, we cannot ignore the thousands of Palestinians, including children, held in detention, often without due process. Their rights must also be respected. We encourage all parties to re-engage in the mediation efforts leading to mutual releases. Beyond these steps, Sierra Leone urges renewed international commitment to a just and lasting peace based on international law and the relevant resolutions of the General Assembly and the Security Council. The current escalation has again demonstrated that the status quo of occupation, blockade, and repeated violence is untenable. We must redouble efforts towards a political solution that ends the occupation and secures the legitimate rights and security of both Palestinian and Israeli. The devastation in Gaza and the West Bank is a blight on the conscience of the world. This Council must not look away. The violence must end, the collective punishment must end, the suffering must end. Let us act not only in words, but through clear and principled actions. Let us demonstrate that the United Nations still stands for the protection of the vulnerable and the upholding of international law. Sierra Leone stands ready to support all efforts towards de-escalation, humanitarian relief, and a path to peace. I thank you.
I thank the Permanent Representative of Sierra Leone. I give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Panama. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Panama is grateful to the representative of Algeria for his initiative to convene this briefing. We value the briefings delivered by Volker Turk, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, and by Dr. Younis Al-Khatib, President of the Palestine Red Crescent Society. They have both provided details of the protracted humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the West Bank. This crisis continues to worsen with human consequences that are increasingly devastating in nature. 1 month after the total closure of crossings allowing access into Gaza, humanitarian agencies have warned that reserves of food, medicines, fuel, and drinking water have already run out. The World Food Programme has confirmed the closure of the 25 bakeries that were continuing to operate with its support, this owing to a lack of supplies. Moreover, UNICEF has warned that around 130 children are born every day in extremely precarious conditions and conditions of extreme vulnerability, without food, without medical care, and with no access to functioning hospitals. We need to see the flag flown high of morality and immediate humanitarian access allowed. Since the resumption of hostilities on the 18th of March, more than 1,000 people died, of which 322 at least were children. Another 609 have been wounded. Since the beginning of this tragic war, more than 1 million children have been repeatedly displaced, surviving in makeshift shelters among piles of rubbish and with no access to essential services. Only yesterday, an UNRWA clinic located in Jabalia in the north of the Strip that was functioning as a shelter for more than 700 people, displaced people, that is, was attacked. That caused the death of 15 people, including 9 children, among which was a newborn of only 2 weeks old. 2 women were also killed. According to UNRWA, many families are opposed to leaving the center, quite simply because they have nowhere to go. Panama deeply regrets the loss of innocent lives and urges the immediate cessation of hostilities and the protection of the civilian population, particularly of women, children, and humanitarian workers. Mr. President, in addition to the details outlined above, conditions have made the provision of humanitarian assistance not only impracticable, but also incredibly perilous for those working on the ground. It is a source of concern to receive news such as that from the 31st of March regarding the finding in Gaza of more than some 10 victims. They were found under the rubble and under the sand and were identified as members of the Palestine Red Crescent Society as well as of the Palestinian Civil Defense, and these people included one UN worker. All had been missing since the 23rd of March. Our condolences go to their loved ones. As we have stated on previous occasions, we reiterate the fact that gravely serious events such as these require comprehensive inquiries in order to clarify surrounding circumstances, dissipate doubt, and identify those responsible. This is because these events stand as deplorable examples of incidents which must not occur, and incidents which starkly underline the need to protect civilians and humanitarian personnel in context of armed conflict. Since the beginning of the conflict in Gaza, at least 408 humanitarian workers have lost their lives. These workers died while endeavoring to save lives. Panama fervently appeals to all parties at all times to guarantee the protection of humanitarian personnel and the inviolability of humanitarian premises. Mr. President, we call for the urgent restoration of the ceasefire in Gaza. The days during which the truce, however weak, was enforced demonstrated that humanitarian assistance can arrive and that it is possible to release hostages. We cannot forget those that are still being detained by Hamas in Gaza. The situation for these hostages remains uncertain. Once again, we demand their immediate and unconditional release. Their protection, medical care, and contact with their families must also be urgently guaranteed. Mr. President, just as we do in Gaza, we note with concern that the situation in the West Bank continues to worsen. Recent reports describe an environment of increasingly acute coercion, one marked by forcible displacement, the demolition of homes, recurrent violence, and severe movement restrictions, all of which affect the daily lives of thousands of people. We reiterate the importance of ensuring that all actions on the ground stringently adhere to the norms of international law, including to international humanitarian law and the resolutions adopted by this very Council. Compliance with all of the above is vital to preserve human dignity and to move towards a comprehensive solution. Mr. President, the protracted suffering playing out both in Gaza and the West Bank is overwhelming and cannot be viewed in isolation from the decisions and extremist acts that have worsened the conflict. These acts include, first and foremost, the attack of the 7th of October and the taking of hostages by Hamas, all of which were inhumane acts that Panama has always condemned. The tragic result of this barbarism is that today thousands of Palestinian families are in critical conditions. Women are forced to give birth in makeshift shelters and with no postnatal care. Children are losing their lives where their deaths could have been avoided. This in the midst of a health system that has collapsed and grave shortages of essential services for the population. Each of these realities demonstrates that insisting that there is a military solution and insisting on extremism only perpetuates suffering. Only a political solution, one which is deeply human in nature and morally imperative, free of Hamas extremism, would be able to lay the foundations for a lasting peace for the Israelis and the Palestinians. On this journey, Panama will support all initiatives that contribute to making that reality possible. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Panama for his statement. I give the floor to the permanent representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank High Commissioner Volker Turk and the President of the Palestine Red Crescent Society, Dr. Al-Khatib, for their detailed briefings. Mr. President, the Republic of Korea reiterates its deep concern over the situation in occupied Palestinian territory, where innocent Palestinian civilians are incessantly suffering under prolonged and intense hostilities and the lack of basic necessities. In Gaza, we are appalled by the repeated incidents where civilians and humanitarian workers were hit by deadly Israeli strikes. Yesterday's announcement that Israel will seize more land in Gaza militarily further deepens our concern over the endless suffering of Palestinian civilians. The targeting of an UNRWA clinic building in northern Gaza just yesterday and the school of Gaza City today, which resulted in dozens of child casualties, as well as the discovery of a mass grave filled with the bodies of aid workers, including 8 PRCS members, are outrageous and tragic developments. We note Israel's announcement indicating that the IDF intended to target Hamas operatives. However, the clear fact is that the majority of those killed in such instances were innocent civilians, including children and humanitarian workers. Such an attack is simply unacceptable. Hamas is also violating international humanitarian law. The rockets fired by Hamas and other militants from civilian infrastructure targeting population centers in Israel are unjustifiable. Thus, we reiterate our demand that all the parties to the conflict, notably Israel, must adhere to the principles of international humanitarian law, including those of distinction, precaution, and proportionality. Thorough and credible investigations should follow for all alleged violations of international law, and perpetrators must be held accountable. We also stress that it is the occupying power's legal obligation to permit free passage of humanitarian relief. Thus, we once again call on Israel to allow entry of aid and commercial goods into Gaza. Hamas' refusal to an immediate and unconditional release of hostages is unconscionable, but this does not legitimize the blocking of humanitarian aid. Mr. President, as other colleagues here in this chamber have pointed out, the situation in the West Bank is also disturbing. The current military operations in northern West Bank by Israel are causing large-scale death, destruction, and displacement for civilians. Expansion of settlements in clear violation of international law and Security Council Resolution 2334, as well as rampant settler violence, are driving Palestinians off their land and must be stopped. Moreover, inflammatory statements and actions, such as senior Israeli officials' visits to holy sites, are further worsening instability in the West Bank and beyond. Mr. President, since the collapse of the ceasefire in Gaza last month, we are witnessing a repetition of the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, as well as risky escalation and further disruptions in the broader Middle East, including Lebanon, Syria, and Yemen. As such, we call on both parties to listen to the desperate voices of innocent Palestinian civilians. the voices of Israeli hostages still held in Gaza, as well as those Palestinians protesting against the brutal rule of Hamas, including Uday, a young participant at the anti-Hamas protest who was then tortured to death. In closing, Mr. President, Israel has the right to protect itself in line with international humanitarian law. However, military means cannot secure sustainable peace and stability for Israelis and their neighbors. Considering the overarching importance of a resolution to the Palestinian question for sustainable peace in the region, we strongly believe that forging a long-term peaceful political environment in the Middle East is directly interconnected with the advancement of the two-state solution. We hope that, starting with a successful ceasefire hostage release deal, a sincere discussion for the reconstruction of Gaza, and for coexistence between Israel and Palestine based on the two-state solution can follow in a meaningful way. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the permanent representative of the Republic of Korea for that statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of France. France thanks the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mr. Volker Turk, and the President of the Palestine Red Crescent, Dr. Younis Al-Khatib. We thank them for their briefings that were enlightening. Our Council has met on several occasions in recent weeks to discuss the fate of hostages, the situation in Gaza, settlement activity in the West Bank, and the protection of humanitarian personnel. The extremely grave nature of the situation demanded us to do so, as speakers have said. However, the current situation calls above all for the Council's action, both in the immediate term to silence the guns and see the resumption of humanitarian aid, but also action in the long term is necessary to restore a political horizon both for the Israelis and the Palestinians. To do that, the Israeli offensive must stop. The President of the Republic said so. There will be no military solution in Gaza. The breakdown of the ceasefire and the resumption of Israeli strikes in Gaza constitute a catastrophic step backwards. It is urgent for hostilities to cease, and we commend the mediation efforts deployed by the US, Egypt, and Qatar. All hostages must be released without delay and in dignity. They have suffered for too long. Hamas must put an end to the inhumane, degrading, and humiliating treatment given to these hostages. They are in hell. We stand in solidarity with their families and with the Israeli people following the terrorist attacks perpetrated by Hamas and other terrorist groups on the 7th of October 2023. France will continue to condemn these. In the immediate term, the humanitarian blockade must end, as we said on Friday, yesterday, and as we state again today. The protection of humanitarian personnel that have already paid a high price in Gaza must be guaranteed in all circumstances in accordance with international law. We condemn Israeli fire upon ambulances, a fire which killed 15 rescue workers in Gaza. The Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs, Jean-Noël Barrot, said the following: "These attacks were unacceptable. Humanitarian workers must never be targeted." France conveys its condolences to the families of the 8 rescue workers of the Palestinian Red Crescent, the 6 rescue workers of the Palestinian Civil Defense, and to the families of the UNRWA staff member. Full clarity must be achieved around this attack, and the fate of those missing must be clarified. We must continue to build Gaza's tomorrow. Gaza's future must be Palestinian. We oppose any forcible displacement of people and any form of territorial seizure. Arab leaders have presented a credible plan for Gaza's reconstruction, with concrete proposals being made to guarantee security and establish a new Palestinian government from which Hamas must be excluded. France, alongside its European partners, supports this plan and contributes to discussions regarding its implementation. In the West Bank, prospects of the two-state solution continue to fade day by day. France reiterates its condemnation for the settlement policy. This is illegal pursuant to international law, just as is the settler violence. France once again opposes all forms of annexation, and in Jerusalem, the status quo of holy sites must be respected. Finally, Palestinians and Israeli people have the right to live in peace and security. Achieving that goal involves providing credible security guarantees to Israel and ensuring the construction of a viable, contiguous Palestinian state. Only only the two-state solution will lead to a just and lasting peace, and it is fueled by this conviction that France, together with Saudi Arabia in New York, is preparing a conference in accordance with the General Assembly decision, a conference on the implementation of that solution. Now, we need to see the release of hostages, the resumption of the ceasefire, and an inquiry into attacks against humanitarian personnel. There also needs to be the immediate resumption of humanitarian aid, the cessation of settlement activity. That must urgently be this Council's message. Thank you.
Je reprends mes fonctions de président.
I now resume my function as President of the Security Council. I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of the Observer State of Palestine.